Well, a warm welcome, everyone, to our Career Equation podcast. And for this episode, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Paul Mullins. Now, Paul's a former HSBC global leader, having delivered large-scale transformation projects across the world. But he started out early on in his career as a teller in the organization, moving on to relationship management, and then ultimately into delivering large-scale and managing complex teams and services. But after 35 years with HSBC, Paul now advises financial services firms on establishing customer-centric strategic growth and bringing his significant strengths in the movement of those initial early ideas and initiatives into real actionable and executable plans. So a warm welcome to you, Paul. I'm absolutely delighted you're joining me today.
You'll spend 80,000 hours at work. You're here because you want those hours to count. Hi, I'm Zoe Schofield.
And I'm Erica Sosner. A warm welcome to the Career Equation podcast. On this podcast, we take time out from our award-winning careers consultancy to share a game-changing formula to help you solve the sum of your life.
Each week, we and our guests use the Career Equation to explore their story so far and help them unlock the secrets of a fulfilling career.
Thanks, Zoe. It's great to be here.
Fabulous. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about what's the day in the life of Paul like these days now you've moved into your consultancy world? What sort of things are you getting involved in?
Thanks, Zoe. Yeah, so it's really exciting actually moving from helping fintechs, helping a smaller business to work with these big organizations, helping them to find ways to grow, find ways to actually land into new markets, actually also working out ways that they can fund themselves in that process as well. It's a great space to find myself in. I'm working with a really super bunch of people as well in Finca, which you can find more about on finca.co.uk. But yeah, it's pretty exciting times and really enjoying the transition.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I am excited to hear about the backstory and what you've learned along the way, which will help us understand why you've moved into where you've moved into and what you're doing. So, yeah, we'll dive into a bit of your story so far, and we're going to do that through the lens of the career equation. And I will explain a little bit more about that in just a second. But before I do that, I know I would really love to know, and I'm sure our audience listening as well would love to know, the challenges of going from a 35-year career with one organization. What did you find most challenging about that? And what surprised you? What was the pleasant surprises as well?
I think what was interesting was finishing after such a long time in a real structure and your kind of a way of working is the norm for you. So it's really quite challenging when that kind of disappears and you don't have that structure. In some way, you have to define, do I really need that? Or how do I cope without it, really, as much as anything else? It's quite a challenging period of time to do that transition. I think it's easy to underestimate really how long that takes to get your head around as much as anything else. And there's some elements of it which you miss because there was a certain kind of way of operating that you were used to. But also, there's also that like flexibility in life that comes to pass.
Absolutely. And I suppose it's that the loss of almost the security blanket that you've known because you knew the organization so well.
Yeah, interestingly, as I reflect on your question, one of the things that is quite challenging is, especially if you've worked for a big organization in a relatively senior role, a lot of the challenges that you have in life are really managing your internal stakeholders to get stuff done. And it's so easy to underestimate the amount of energy that goes into that for all good reasons, because you need people to be along the pathway of what you're trying to deliver. You need to make sure people understand what you're trying to achieve and to work with them so that you can get stuff over the line, really. So when that's not there, it's almost easy to forget that that was a skill that you had, working with people to get good outcomes. But also, it took me a while is to realize, actually, it's the same skill set you need in a different environment, really. It's just with different people in an external context. And some bits of it you need to work harder on in terms of keeping the connections, but you do get to choose to who you want to work with and different pathways. But I think that was one of the things that actually took me a little bit of a while was acceptance that that was a skill set and to accept that that's something that really you can translate and you can use effectively in an external environment.
A great realisation here from Paul about transferable skills. It's very easy for us to gloss over our strengths and talents that we've built up over years and to see how easily they translate to other opportunities, industries and roles. They're often the skills that come naturally to us or we use without really appreciating their value. So what skills, strengths and talents are you overlooking when thinking about future work experiences you'd love to have?
Yeah, it's transferable. I know certainly I reflect on how we develop those skills actually really early in our career. When we think about those characters, whether that's customers or people that you're working with, you're just thrown in at the deep end when you start at that grassroots level. And that doesn't go. I think that really builds and layers upon as you go through the organization. What about pleasant surprises then that you think, oh, this is nice and this is refreshing?
What I always really enjoy about my new world isn't necessarily what people are trying to tell me that they want to be able to deliver, but I'm always really interested in why do you want to do that and people's context around it. I think if you have a genuine interest in what people are doing and you share experiences, then good things happen ultimately. So that's been a pleasant surprise, and I am interested in people and what they're doing and what they're trying to get out of it in order to help them. Maybe it's a kind of relationship thing as much as anything else. So it's been great to be able to build that. And there are a number of people that I've met over the last sort of 6 to 9 months. It's been an absolute joy to understand where they're trying to get connected to them, really.
Yeah, I think that's what's in us, that establishing trust and authenticity in your dealings with someone through the curiosity that you have. So they know actually this guy's really genuine. In terms of looking back, if someone else was out there facing a transition after so many years into something new, what advice would you give them?
I would say take time to reflect on what you really enjoyed and what you valued. Be brave and don't just run straight into what you were doing and think about what you want to do. I think one thing for sure is if you've done anything, and there are people still out there that have 20 years with an organization upwards, you get a couple of chances in your life to do different careers. And so think about that, because if you just jump into the same boat, you're going to sail along the same route. And so there are opportunities to have these pivotal moments in your life, I think, as much as anything else. There are very few moments in life when you get that opportunity to reflect on what do I really want to do out of this and will I value it? I also think that you have to think, okay, so am I going to look back after the next 15, 20 years and say, okay, I wish I had done that, because you're not going to get it back again. So I think that would be one of the things I would say to people, just take your time a little bit. I know that's not always possible for everybody, but do think about the decision you're making.
Time for reflection, we don't often award ourselves, do we? In fact, we often spend more time planning things like holidays and adventures than we do on our career. Yet we spend over 80,000 hours at work in our lifetime. So it's super important to take a little bit of time. So I think that's really sound advice. So just before we head into some questions about your story so far, if you like, through the lens of the career equation, I just wonder if there's anything that sits with you at the moment in terms of a current conundrum or challenge as you're venturing into this new land.
So I think moving from dealing with an internal stakeholder environment into kind of building a network outside. So how you translate that skill, and I'm not sure I was really ready for it. One of the things I've learned is just people are just terrible at following up. And so there's always that opportunity to differentiate yourself by actually doing that. I think it's been a challenge to accept that, this takes time. You need to be patient. You need to ask for the business as well. And so that's the other world that you're into. That means that sometimes you need to be a little bit more direct about what you're trying to get out of stuff. And I know for sure I work well when I work with others. And so that's a conscious decision as well that actually I needed to make. But I'm not sure I knew I wanted to make that decision until I realized just how much work it is if you're doing it on your own.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So I'm getting a sense of that it's about recognizing those transferable skills in terms of stakeholders and building those relationships and trusting that you've got those skills. It's just you're applying them to people in a different scenario.
Yes.
About really standing out from the crowd in terms of what is it that Paul brings that other consultants don't bring. So we're going to step into the world of the equation and look at 4 kind of key moments I'm going to ask you about that relate to the equation. So just for our audience's sake, in case they're not familiar with the career equation, just a simple explanation from me. So the career equation really says, simply and practically, if you take your skills, so the things that you're really good at, your gifts, your talents, your strengths, and you apply them to an area of passion, So a subject, a topic, an industry, a way of being that you really love, you're curious about, that gives you energy, and you have an impact. So you're making a difference in a way that's meaningful and fulfilling for you. You're on the road to a thriving career. Fundamentally, the fourth component in the career equation is environmental fit. So all of that good stuff, the skills, the passions, the impacts, need to be happening in an environment that helps you to flourish and be at your best. So the four components are skills plus passions plus impact plus environmental fit. And we're going to use the lens of that to chat to Paul a little bit about some moments in time in his career story so far that sort of talk to those components, if you like. So are you happy to dive in and do that with me, Paul?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So let's start with a moment in time around the skills and idea. Tell me about a moment where you first realized in your younger days that, oh, I actually have a skill for this. I'm good at this. I'm like, this is a bit of a strength for me. What kind of comes to mind for you?
Let me step back a little bit, actually, within my previous employer. And I'm sure you might test me to go a little bit further, but let me give you a little bit of lead. Is, I guess, if I go back to like kind of early 2000s, when I was undertaking a planning role for HSBC in the UK, complete upheaval on the structure of the bank, kind of leadership teams at the time. They knew they wanted what the end game was to look like, which was a separation of these retail and commercial banking, but they just didn't know how to get there. And I was given the task of consulting with all these stakeholders about what this change was going to have the impact and come up with some sort of plan to achieve that task. And I learned through that exercise that actually I was really good at building consensus in a very complex and challenging situation, even when the outcome wasn't necessarily going to mean everyone was going to be a winner, actually. So in fact, in many cases, there was more losers than winners. And ultimately, I learned about human behavior, how it's far better to get something down on a piece of paper. It may not be perfect, but it starts a process. And so that art was less about what was on the paper, but how you managed to allow people to accept that you were bringing a perspective for them to contribute to. It wasn't not something simply being done, but something they were part of that journey. And I used that approach many times subsequently over the years when I needed to get like challenging transformation done. And so I think it was that simple behavior around humans and treating people with respect and values and making sure that people had the opportunity to have a view to get a good outcome, because like not everybody has the right answers. So I think that was a pivotal like aha moment.
Yeah. And I think what's really nice about that is you're connecting. And I'm thinking about times in organizations when we've gone through transitions that not everyone is happy about. There's lots of changes to structures, is the power in people feeling like they've at least been heard, like they've had the opportunity to have their say and to feel listened to, even if ultimately it's still not the outcome that they want. I think that's an incredible strength because they're not easy conversations to have, are they? You know, going in that this isn't what people want, this isn't what they want to hear, but I've got to find a way to engage with them to try and take them on this journey so that they feel heard and valued, even if ultimately it doesn't land into their favor. So that came to you quite naturally almost. And so I'm curious if I did push you back a bit further and said, what about young Paul, school days Paul or youth Paul? What comes to mind for you then in terms of early strengths or skills?
You mean Paul that didn't have this color hair?
Yeah.
So it's hard to draw these parallels. But again, if I really pull back even further, the best thing I could do is probably tie it to sports. I mean, I was mad on sport as a kid and I would do like almost anything. But one thing I really excelled at was judo. And I got into it in a sort of like random way. But it wasn't the sport particularly, but it was the fact that I was also drawn at the time to coaching others. And actually quite a young age. I was leading classes from about 16, not just teaching kids, but adults too. And it's funny, I never thought about at the time, when you reflect back at it, the respect you were getting as the 16-year-old. And when you look at your own kids, you know, my God, you've got grown men and you've got this young person that's actually that you're willing to listen to. And how do you get that respect? And I think what I learned was you really need to capture an audience's attention. You need to entertain them. And then I was looking after kids. And anybody who's got kids know that when they get bored, it's like herding cats. But also, I think I got a lot around its clear communication, around how you do something, how to act. So I think perspective around people, that's also a strength I did bring to corporate life, probably without realizing. I think it probably reflects some of me at my best when I think back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what's so lovely about why I like going back to the early stuff, because we don't recognize some of those traits and skills and talents that were really there at the beginning, almost, where you have a natural ability to connect with people from, certainly in that respect, would have been from all walks of life and ages. I'm glad that you went back to both bits to draw the conclusion in reflection about, oh gosh, actually, I've been applying that stuff all the way through my career, and it's a natural place for me to excel. There's definitely a connection between you still using those skills now in your consultancy.
Yeah, I would say for sure. Yeah, I think when you reflect on most businesses, a people business, so like how you deal with people, how you build consensus around things, but ultimately how you drive things forward. But I think what comes back to all of that, and if you think about the example of maybe the teaching, people don't have to be there. And that some of it is about not being the leader and telling people what they need to do. It's more about people understanding and respecting why they're doing these things and bringing them along the journey. And I think anybody who's in any position where they need to get great outcomes, and that could be in a large company or could be running a small business, because your team is not necessarily like the people just working for you. Your team is all the people that you need to do stuff for you. If you think about along those lines and how you build that, I think there's a great parallels around it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's nice in the earlier part you were saying there about people don't need to be there, it's almost the same in your consultancy. Your customers, they're not committed to you until you've established that relationship with them and that rapport, and they're going on the journey with you. So the skills that you took early on in those due day days of people joining your classes are the same as getting them to join your expertise as a consultant, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. Although obviously you're not going to be throwing them over your shoulder to do work with you. I guess that's a major difference.
Slight difference there, just a slight difference, yeah. So let's move into passions then. So this idea of working in an area of something that provides like curiosity and energy. So if I got you to tell me and to think back about a moment where you think I, at that point, was truly loving what I was doing. I was definitely in my sweet spot in terms of energized by the work that I was doing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the moment that I focused on was really when I was running a cross-border, cross-functional team to develop the international business for HSBC in North America. So I think what was memorable about that was that role. It didn't just transcend COVID times, but it was about building not just a physical winning team, but that developed into a virtual team. And I think like maybe one of these people reported to me, but that wasn't the point. The point was you built this very efficient, very effective team of individuals who were ready to deliver the right outcome. But actually you had to really work, because we were then in a virtual world that we were all used to maintain that connection and that consistency of how you operated. So the effort you put in, you were getting the reward back out again, really, because you were not just helping people to actually at that time, helping them to support themselves to be successful, but you were really helping each other in their personal lives too. It was a winning team. I think that was me at my best, loving what I'm doing and getting good outcomes as well.
Yeah. And this links to what you were saying earlier about engaging people and taking them on a journey and bringing them together, and hearing. It's all the same skills, isn't it? In terms of hearing and recognizing what each party bring to that team, but really helping them take those ideas and visions and forming it into something that can move forward with that sort of momentum that you bring. In terms of consultancy, do you see that that still sits within that area of passion for you?
What it tells me always is you need to know the people that you're working with. You need to build trust. You need to build a relationship. You need to know who you're dealing with, and you need to know their backstory too. Otherwise, you don't know why things are happening sometimes. I think it's more about vulnerabilities and really being able to build connection with people. That means that you can build it back to the trust thing, really.
Paul really wonderfully talking here about building trust, rapport and relationships with the people he worked with, acknowledging the importance of needing to truly know them as individuals, how understanding their story so far and what matters most was vital for Paul in building trust and connected teams. This is why we really advocate for the career equation being one of those tools in your leadership kit bag that can really help to enhance the quality of the conversations you're having, helping you to understand them as individuals and really helping them to feel seen and heard. So why not take the opportunity with a colleague to chat to them about what matters most to them, what experiences they're looking for next, and how you can help and support them to get there.
That makes sense. And I guess that leads nicely then into the third component. impact in terms of what matters most to you and how you define success. So if I asked you to think back to a time in your career where maybe you felt, I can see a tangible difference, I'm making a real difference here and I'm loving that, what sort of moment in time comes to mind for you in terms of impact?
Yeah, so the best example I think I can give was when I was leading significant restructure for HSBC within its retail bank. So a decision had been made about bringing together the retail and the wealth business and reshaping that organization with a customer first lens. And at the time, we really didn't have any consistent way of operating. And so this was hampering business growth and our ability to deliver change at scale. And actually, really inefficient in terms of like cost structures as well. So, of course, it's going to have impact on people as you do that. Inevitably, that change meant you needed to make sure people knew exactly where the outcome was going to be. They knew what the impact it was, but also that we were realigning ourselves for a better future. So this was across 40 countries to realign an organization structure, identifying savings, and making sure that actually people could see the right outcome from this. I think getting people to own the outcome and help them with their ability to actually share what that was going to look like in the future. So people know that I'm on their side to get the right outcome. Also, ultimately, with a tough message to be able to deliver, but doing it in the right way. So I really felt I made a material impact there. And we got this thing done in quite an effective way. And it did make real change. And when I think back to, well, what was coming out of that for me, it's all about having empathy for people's situation, understanding it. I think pragmatism, really, but building that trust connection so individuals know that it's going to be done in the right way and that they need to be part of that journey. So, yeah, that would be the one.
Yeah, definitely. So there's making the challenging circumstance possible, really, by building trust and bringing people along that crusade, if you like, of making those difficult choices and decisions. But you can only do that when you've established that trust and authenticity at the beginning. So I really hear that. I'm going to shake things up a bit with environment because I'm going to get you to think about a time when actually the environment was actively working against you being at your best. So it's a bit more uncomfortable to think about often, but where does that take you in terms of a memory?
Yeah, it is a tough one. You're right. I guess if I think back to what I would pull back to is I'm probably not going to be specific on this one actually, but as I was dealing with, obviously, I was in a really tough regulatory environment. So rules that we were working with were extremely tight and strict about how we needed to operate. They were actually open to interpretation where it was common sense. And I think there was an expectation around that. If it was in what you were doing was in customers' interest, actually that was okay. But at the time, I was working with internal compliance teams that shared actually a very different view. And obviously they're led and managed in a different way, but it's almost like they were actively working against what made sense for the customer. Many real issues had to be dealt with across many years of challenges that had actually not been looked at as well. Anybody will be familiar with this. People hadn't been looking under rocks. And as soon as you look under rock, you do find things. So, and then problems flood out. How do you manage that when it hasn't happened before? And so you end up with this fire to put out at the same time as you're wanting to find great solutions for customers as well. So a very challenging situation and really hard for a team that you build together to build things for a customer. And I think that there's a few things I learned around there. How did I solve it? I pretty much try to own everything. That was a bad idea, by the way, at the time. So in reflection, but you feel like you're trying to slightly protect, but I'm not sure I necessarily should have done that. So you've always got to recognize some of the problems that you create for yourself in those situations. But also, I think I needed a bit more support from my boss at the time. There was a change of leadership and suddenly I had somebody that I knew had my back. And I think as I reflected on it, it's so hard not to overestimate the impact that got. Again, I think we're back to this trust thing, really, and the personal lift that I had. And I think probably through that process, it gave me more confidence in the ability to actually delegate because people do make mistakes and that's okay. And you need to create this psychological safety to allow people to do that. And it runs from top to bottom. So if you haven't got it above you, it's very hard for your people to be able to do the same thing. So that's a big lesson for me. Again, I think probably a bit of a theme here.
And I think what's so important that you said, I don't think I realized at the time about how damaging it can be on your mental health, but it's not just you. It's the sort of the ripple effect of how that affects the rest of the team. And I know certainly when we talk to people about the environment, lots of people underestimate the environmental fit part of the equation, if you like. So I've had people say, Zoe, I'm working in my area of skill. I love it. I'm great. I'm passionate about what I do. And I can see I'm making a difference for people. I'm just not happy. And when we dig deep, we understand that actually it's the components that are making up your environment. So it might be the leadership, the values of the organization, the bureaucracy and red tape, all of those things. If you like, I always think of it as soil that you're planted in while you're working. And that soil, just like any plant, has to have the right nutrients for you to be at your best. So stick you in soil that doesn't have that, with someone who's leading you that maybe doesn't have your back, where you don't have that relationship, where you feel safe in terms of the decisions you're making, that starts to undermine your ability to thrive in terms of your skills, what you're passionate about, and making a difference. And so the all four parts of the equation have to be in play equally in order to hit that sweet spot.
Yeah, just to finish on that, by the way, I agree with you. And it's something I talk to people a lot about is really you have to get the culture right first. If you don't get those foundations right, you really can't sustain the growth. And so sometimes you need to take one step back to take two steps forwards. Because if you don't have those foundations right, things are going to happen in the future that's going to cause you some problems.
Yeah, a good reminder there about really taking the time to do that groundwork first
Yeah.
and to understand each unique part, each unique person in the process, because everyone needs something slightly different. They bring different things to the table. So, Paul, what we're going to do is pull together the idea of the discussion we've been having around skills and passions, impact and environment, and pull it together into something that we call a career design statement, a kind of statement of intent, like a North Star, if you like, that says, this is Paul in my thriving zone, and this is what I want to be in and around when I work. So I'm going to use the framework, and I'm going to have some blanks in the framework that you're going to fill. So I'll explain it as we go through. But the first blank is super easy because it's just your name. So I'm going to say I, and you say
Paul.
Absolutely brilliant. You get the first bit right. Well done. So I, Paul, will use
Yeah.
my skills in, and I'd like you to fill in the blank there of what skills that you want to be playing with, that you're really good at, that you want to be using.
So the skills I want to use to be able to help people is curiosity, listening, translating what people think they want into what that true outcome is, using my knowledge base to be able to not just convert my knowledge of banking and financial, but my knowledge of how to deal with people and how to actually get good outcomes through building relationships. So using that skill set is where I come from.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep. So I'm hearing, just to summarize, I'm hearing, so use your skills in curiosity, listening, and translating ideas into the possible. So if I was summarizing, so you're taking what they think is a good idea and you're saying, okay, so now let's make that into something possible.
Or is it a good idea? So helping them to
Yeah.
challenge, so use my skill around building a relationship, understanding before delivering.
This is always what we call a messy draft to start with. So don't worry about that. Okay, so we've got skills and your passion for. So what is the top sort of passions that would fit in that you think I've got to be working in and around this space?
So passion for people, passion for great business outcomes and the sustainable outcomes, and translating that into whichever scenario I'm in.
Okay, so so it's definitely about people and great sustainable business outcomes. And what do you want to be known for? What is the impact that you want to have?
What do I want to be known for as Paul
Yeah.
Mullins working in this environment? Achieve stuff for others. And I think that the best recognition always comes not when you've asked it, but it becomes as a result of what you did and how you did it in the right way to get good outcomes. Delivering great outcomes for people in a really sustainable way.
And you'd said earlier in your chat about people realizing their potential. So it's about helping to achieve their outcomes and realize their potential, because I'm getting from you often the people part of it. So an environment that is what works best for you. So what would go in the gap?
Ironically, I quite like working in an environment where things are not clear and not certain, and I can deliver some clarity for people. I'm sure there's a much smarter way of saying that, by the way.
I guess what I'm hearing in that is about an environment that's uneven and it's choppy waters, but where you can bring the best out of the team, whoever that team is.
Or whatever that situation is, yeah. And I think I'm at my best in that uncertain environment where you need somebody to be able to look at what's there and make something out of what you have.
It's where you're able to play in choppy waters.
Yeah, sail through choppy waters to get to the safe haven or the safe harbor.
So let me play back some of what I've heard. then you'll be able to take this away and play with it more. So I'm hearing that I, Paul, will bring my skills in curiosity, listening, and translating ideas through challenge into the possible. My passion for people and great sustainable business outcomes to achieve stuff for others to realize their potential in an environment where I can sail through choppy waters to safe haven and help people achieve their best works best for you.
Pretty good summary.
How does that land with you in terms of, it might feel a bit messy at the moment, but do you think a design statement would help you summarize what you bring to the table?
I think it's a great framework. It definitely feels like it's something you need to play around with that isn't set in stone. It's a rough draft, and then you continually evolve that as you think through what does that really mean in terms of like where I'm trying to get to. So yeah, all good.
Brilliant. But the idea is that you can summarize in a few sentences who you are when you're at your best and what you bring to the table in a way that's personal and unique to you. So only Paul would be saying this. If my statement would say something completely different, even though we may have similar sort of skills and traits in terms of us, they would be unique to us. So definitely my encouragement is continue to play with that. Do you think it's something that will help solve sort of some of the challenges we spoke about earlier about demonstrating those transferable skills and finding your sort of place with external stakeholders? Do you see it as something that will help you?
It could help you at any part of your journey. It depends on what you're needing to do or how you're trying to translate what you can bring to the table. But I think you need to interpret it relative to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, yeah. And I think to link back to something that you said right back at the beginning about differentiating yourself from others so that you get business and you get connections and people want to listen to what Paul has to say, your statement can be a helpful frame to demonstrate your uniqueness to compare to someone else. So as we bring the conversation to a close, a couple of final questions for you. If I took you back and you were having a conversation with Paul, the judo coach, about his future world of work and the world of careers, what would you say to him?
I would say embrace whatever you're doing and give the moment in time the best opportunity to be successful. So don't look too far forwards and good things will happen. Don't get too set in stone about where you're going to be. If you've got an opportunity in front of you, take it. The sort of single biggest piece of advice I would give the younger Paul or the younger anybody really is quite often you never get the second chance. The last thing you want to do is look back and say, I wish I had.
Absolutely. Brilliant advice. And my other question is people may want to know more about you, Paul, or to find you or connect with you in relation to the business that you do now. Where can they do that?
Well, two places. There's LinkedIn, so you can easily find me on LinkedIn. So feel free to drop me a message or connect with me. But actually, please also look at finca.co.uk because you'll find me, but you'll also find a whole bunch of really talented people that can really help businesses to grow, fintechs, whether they're looking for funding or they're looking for like support on really how do you land and expand your business in this market or other markets. Come talk to us because we can really help you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. We will make sure that goes in the show notes as well so that everyone can see that clearly. It remains for me just to thank you for joining me for this podcast episode and being really open and honest and delving deeply through the lens of the career equation. It's been a pleasure for me and thank you for taking the time, Paul.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Career Equation podcast.
Stay connected with us on socials for more career insights, behind-the-scenes moments, and updates on upcoming episodes. And if you'd like to work with us, visit the Career Equation website or click the links in the show notes.
Remember, the Career Equation isn't just a podcast, it's a journey towards unlocking your full potential, enjoying your life, and doing remarkable stuff.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and feedback with us. Your input shapes the future of our show.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success. This is Erica Sosna
And Zoe Schofield. Signing off.